The funeral was quiet except for the sound of whispers. A little girl clutched the hem of her dress, her eyes red from crying, her small hands trembling as she stood by the casket. She had lost her father, the only person who had ever made her feel safe in a world that seemed so cold. When she glanced at the woman who was supposed to comfort her, she found no warmth. Her stepmother's face carried no trace of sorrow. Instead, her gaze wandered across the room, meeting the eyes of a man who lingered at the back, watching far too intently. The girl felt an unease she could not name, but even in her young age, she recognized that the glances carried something unspoken. As people came forward to offer condolences, she overheard fragments of hushed conversations. Some whispered about how sudden her father's death had been. Others about how the stepmother had grown too close to someone else long before today. The words were sharp, cutting through the fragile silence, but nobody said them aloud where they could be challenged. The little girl only caught pieces, enough to sense that what she was hearing was not meant for her. When the final prayer ended and most of the mourners departed, the girl remained by the casket, unwilling to step away. She wanted to stay close to her father for just a little longer. But her stepmother's voice, curt and dismissive, broke that moment. "It's over now," she said, as if grief had an expiration date. Her tone was not one of comfort, but of impatience, as though the girl's sorrow was an inconvenience. The man from the back had approached by then, and the two of them exchanged words in low voices. Though she could not catch their conversation, she could feel the exclusion, the sense that whatever bond tied them together was stronger than the one that should have tied her to her father's wife. Not long after, while the child still wiped at her tears, the stepmother leaned down, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "You can't stay here anymore," she whispered coldly. The words struck like a slap. The girl blinked, confused, believing she had misheard. But her stepmother's expression told her otherwise. There was no room for tenderness, no hesitation. "You'll have to leave after today. This house is not yours. You're not my responsibility." Each word carried finality, delivered with a deliberate cruelty that left no space for hope. The girl's throat tightened, but no sound came out. She wanted to plead, to ask where she was supposed to go, to remind this woman that she was all she had left. But the stepmother had already turned away, her attention back on the man who lingered too close, who spoke to her in tones that seemed far too familiar. Even at 10 years old, the child could sense betrayal hanging in the air, thick and suffocating, stealing away not only her father's memory, but also the security of the life she had known. The day that should have been about mourning her father became the day she realized she had been abandoned. The following days brought no comfort, only harsher truths. The girl returned from school to find her belongings packed into a single worn suitcase by the door. Her stepmother's voice carried the final verdict without hesitation. "You're going to your aunt's or anywhere else you can manage. You're not staying here." There was no discussion, no explanation, only rejection. The man who had stood by her stepmother at the funeral lounged casually in the living room, smirking as though the suffering of a child was entertainment. His presence was already normalized in the house, his hand resting on the stepmother's shoulder, as if he had always belonged there. The girl realized that her father's home was no longer his, no longer hers. It had been claimed by those who cared nothing for either of them. She tried to cling to the memory of her father, the promises he made to always keep her safe, but those promises were buried along with him. Every word the stepmother spoke now made it clear that the bond they had pretended to share was an illusion. She had no intention of fulfilling her role as guardian. Instead, she embraced the freedom that came from his absence, flaunting her relationship with her lover openly. They laughed together, sometimes cruelly, in front of the child, their voices dripping with mockery whenever her father's name was mentioned. He was too blind to see what was right in front of him. The man chuckled one evening, and the stepmother smirked in agreement. The girl felt her chest tighten, as though grief itself was being mocked. Meals were no longer shared. The kitchen table that once held quiet dinners between father and daughter now belonged to the new pair, their plates full, their glasses filled with wine, while the girl was handed scraps or told to fend for herself. She was an outsider in her own home, watching the walls close in around her. The warmth that once lived there had been stripped away, replaced with cold stares and whispered plans that did not include her. The cruelty was deliberate, each act designed to remind her she was unwanted. When she lingered in the hallway, hoping for acknowledgement, the man sneered and called her the leftover, as though she were nothing more than baggage attached to a life they wanted erased. Her stepmother said nothing to defend her. Instead, she rolled her eyes and added, "She'll be gone soon enough." Those words struck deeper than any insult, making the child understand that her very existence was an inconvenience they intended to eliminate. One night, when rain beat heavily against the windows, the final blow was delivered. Her stepmother handed her the suitcase, not caring where she would go or how she would survive. "Your father is gone, and with him, any claim you had here. Don't come back." There was no emotion in her voice, only the satisfaction of cutting ties. The man stood behind her, arms crossed, his grin cruel and triumphant. With no one to defend her and nowhere to turn, the girl stepped out into the cold, carrying the weight of betrayal heavier than the suitcase in her hand. She had lost her father, and now she had been discarded by the woman who should have cared for her. In that moment, she understood she was not just abandoned, she had been erased from the life she once knew, cast out so that infidelity could thrive unchallenged.